The legislation on this basically dictates that it cannot be waived. It is not an option for you to do that. It is something that will be part of every single residential contract that you write.
Forever.
Yeah, until the government changes it, if they ever change it, but they won't. It's just gonna, ultimately, I suspect this will be more redundant than anything.
You also can't like change the 0.25 percentage to make it higher so that your offer looks stronger. It has to be.
Yeah. No, the act itself dictates how this is going to play out and what the penalty is, and we cannot change the act. You can manage deposits, you know, and Ron brought it up yesterday. You know, if you're in an unconditional, you know, offer situation, and you are looking at strengthening your offer, you know, you can offer to put forward a non-refundable, obviously non-refundable if it's unconditional, deposit, but you can also put a deposit payable directly to the seller client if you want to. I don't know if that's in your best interest as a buyer agent. However, it can show a lot of strength. And if your buyer is secure, your buyer is fully qualified, and your buyer is committed, that can be, you know, a useful avenue to having your offer look better than others. Bailey, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand who has the right to, like, if somebody puts a $5,000 deposit on a property and they rescind their offer, which I think, like you said, is probably quite redundant and unlikely with conditions being quite common now, but where it says that the buyer has to pay that within 14 days, do we as the brokerage have the right to release that without the buyer signing some sort of release of the contract and releasing that to the seller on that line of the release?
For the rescission?
Yeah.
So if the buyer delivers the notice of rescission, so there is a standard form that's created for that. And I'll get to that one in a little bit, but ultimately the buyer needs to sign the notice of rescission. It gets delivered to the seller. The notice of rescission contemplates the release of the deposit. So the penalty amount is automatically acknowledged and gets paid to the seller, and then the balance of that would be paid back to the purchaser.
Okay.
So the brokerage has the right to take that rescission amount and pay it to the seller?
Correct. So
Okay.
for example, let's draw an example here to help Bailey. If we have $1 million offer, you know, the rescission period is 25, or the rescission amount is $2,500. The total deposit that we've collected up front was $5,000. The buyer decides to deliver their notice of rescission within the allotted time. It gets delivered, it's acknowledged. We as the brokerage, if we're holding the deposit, now have the authority to release $2,500 to the seller and the balance, the remaining $2,500 back to the purchaser. That's all contained in the rescission notice form.
Okay, and so do they still also need to sign a release of the contract?
No.
On top of that?
No, the rescission notice, because the buyer has the unilateral right to cancel the contract with this legislation. So by delivering that notice, the buyer is exercising their right to cancel the contract within the allotted time frame. So the seller has no recourse and no challenge if the buyer delivers the rescission notice.
Okay, so if somebody delivers a rescission notice, then we don't need a release of the contract on the other form. It's
Correct.
just if there's no rescission, then we would do a release of the contract if they release it due to conditions or something else.
If there was no rescission, we would treat it just as we always have.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Was there another question there? Jack?
This might sound a bit weird, but I'm a little bit confused, but not really. On the listing side, if someone rescinds the offer, are we allowed now to take multiple accepted offers?
Nothing has changed. Of course,
Okay.
yes, you absolutely are. So
Yeah.
your rescission period on a backup offer, so all rescission periods are effective from the date of acceptance. So if you have a backup offer that's, you know, for example, subject to the seller ceasing to be obligated, you know, we're at the 5th of January, say it's the 15th of January, and that gets accepted today. Today would be the date that triggers the rescission. So the rescission period would be, today's Thursday, would be Friday, Monday, Tuesday. So 11:59 p.m. Tuesday night, the rescission period would expire, even if it is a backup offer.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And that's one of the things, you know, we're crossing over, and you know, it does certainly provide a little bit of a, you know, opportunity for a gray area and stuff like that. But we really need to just be clear about, you know, if we just remove this rescission period from the contract, we're treating it as if we have every other contract. We're treating the contracts almost exactly the same today with this element on top. And if we look at it just independent and separate from the contract, then we should be clear and be able to explain it to our clients properly. Any more comments on the deposit element of things? Again, if we're not collecting it up front or we're making an offer for a buyer, try to at least allow for a minimum amount to cover the rescission period. It will benefit your buyer in the end as far as negotiation, and it'll limit the opportunity for a seller to come back. If we're writing or we're reviewing purchase and sale contracts for sellers, we're going to make sure that at least the rescission penalty is due and payable on acceptance or within 24 hours of acceptance. That should be our standard practice when working with sellers. That's how we're going to protect them. Okay. Let's see. Deposit payable, terms and conditions, completion. So the other element that we discussed yesterday, here, so the form that we looked at earlier, the BCFSA form about the disclosure of buyer's right of rescission, all that information is right here as well. It is acknowledged, and it's understanding. The amounts are calculated in front, but if we review that form initially up front, it will make going through this a lot easier. We went through this in detail yesterday. Do we have any further questions on it? Are we clear? Like, is there anybody struggling with this?
Hey, Darren.
Yeah.
So I have a quick question regarding that. So I think I have a clear understanding, but just to make sure I do, both the buyers and the sellers must initial that section 23, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of the one that's above it, so 22, I believe it is, that if you can scroll down or up, sorry, the acceptance irrevocable. This portion here, so I've just received 2 offers on a new listing we put up. Both buyers agents have not had their buyers initial the acceptance irrevocable. Is that something to which is necessary, unnecessary? I'm a little confused on that particular
Necessary
section. It is.
Yes. Yeah.
So every buyer, every seller on every offer, that has to be initialed.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's treat it as if it's any other initialed section. You know, we have initialed spots. The key here is, you know, it's an acknowledgement and an understanding from the buyer. It also helps us and protects us and makes sure that, you know, we've had that conversation with our clients and our clients understand what this means. And so anywhere on a contract that there is a space for a required initial, we need to make sure that it's done.
Okay.
Whether it affects the, you know, and Peter sort of touched on this a little bit yesterday, you know, if a buyer's initial is missing here, you know, whether that affects the enforceability of the contract is probably questionable at this time. The intent is all there. Acknowledgements and such are signed everywhere else. As a housekeeping item, I would want to ensure that it's all done. And I'm gonna tell you that as a brokerage policy, we're gonna make sure that every single contract that we have on file is initialed appropriately and signed appropriately. Is that somewhat clear? If it calls for initials, get it initials. Okay. The other element in the CPS is this acceptance time. And now we've talked a little bit about this in the past. Section 26 or item number 26 here. I've seen a lot of contracts in review, that come back with this filled in ultimately when a seller has prepared or altered the contract and send it back as a counter offer. I've seen acceptance dated in here prior to, several days prior to when the offer was open till, and then indicators that the offer was accepted, a couple days down the road. So what we want to do, for one thing, make certain that the final acceptance is filled in. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be signed, initial, or acknowledged. This will be something that we make sure is completed when that final offer is accepted. There are no more counter offers. We have a fully accepted offer. That date will go here, and that will trigger what our end date is for the rescission period. So if you're balancing or you're negotiating back and forth, this section here at the bottom will be completed ultimately when that last set of initials is received.
So Darren, I've seen in the past where other agents don't add in on 26 the date there until, I guess, necessarily all countering has been done. So do you recommend moving forward with that strategy as well? Or once the seller has accepted the contract, should we fill in that date, even though there still could potentially be countering?
So the way you're seeing it, Ali, with 26 filled in once that final counter offer is accepted, is the way it should be. This has been the date that triggers ultimately when the deposit is due, or if there's a 24-hour or a 36-hour. This is the date stamp that triggers those types of items, and that's where a lot of the confusion in the past has come, and a lot of the complications from it. The challenge or the problem is we've seen other realtors fill this in at less appropriate times. Like I said, as presenting the initial counter offer. Now, if that's, if everything gets signed and accepted the same day, that's great. But oftentimes we've seen where it hasn't. So the way you're seeing it is the best practice for sure, to fill it in at the last minute when everything is accepted.
Okay.
Darren, when they do that, do you have them sign at the bottom, even though you've left the date blank? You've had the seller sign?
I'm sorry?
When you leave it blank until it's an accepted offer,
Yeah.
you leave the seller's signature blank at the bottom, because I've always filled it out on the first offer and then we counter after.
Yeah, no, what the seller will sign under seal here with the counter offer and send it back. Ultimately, putting the accepted offer date in is a housekeeping item. It doesn't require an additional signature. We just need to make sure it's filled in. And then most importantly, when we have that date filled in and everything is complete, we make sure that those final copies are delivered to all of our clients.
Wouldn't it make sense to put the acceptance below the signature then? Just to make.
Yeah, it could very well, absolutely. And we've been this is just sort of how things have been rolling for a number of years. These are the forms that are all of our regulators and lawyers and everybody have created for us. So how we utilize them obviously is going to be the trigger. I got Jack's hand up and then Amin.
Yeah, sorry for all the questions, but it's good we get this out of the way. Is it absolutely critical that we put the seller's email address on this? I mean, that just seems unbelievable.
No, I do not believe so. The way I see this and sort of the discussion around this, you act for the seller. Your actions are those of the seller or those of whoever your client is working for. If the seller wants notice delivered to your email address, or even from a realtor's perspective, when we're filling this out, if our seller is to get notice, that notice is coming to us and we're delivering it to the seller.
Makes
So
sense.
Darren, it's okay if we put our information on here rather than the sellers?
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
great.
And so Darren, sorry, just a little further on what Ali was just mentioning there. The address, I think I read in one of the updates from BCFSA talking about we could use the brokerage address. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the address on the very top of the contract? On the
Nope, talking about the address on item number 26, the last page of the CPS.
Okay, are we supposed to put the buyer's address on here? On the CPS, the very first page?
On the front page, we should be filling as much information as possible.
I just find that's very, it's not very, aren't we like?
We
Our private
ultimately, you know, it's
information.
ultimately it's not required. But really, you know, we as the brokerage need that information when the deal is submitted anyway. You know, there's an element of protection, obviously, with personal information as far as, you know, where the buyer is and what their contact information is. Sometimes they do not want that information specifically in the contract, but ultimately that section 1 of the contract, when we're filling in the client details, you know, we need that at the brokerage to make sure that our file is complete and we get everything sent where it needs to go.
Yeah, I just don't feel comfortable giving the sellers, the buyer's address or phone
Yeah.
number or email.
And many buyers aren't comfortable with it. So, I mean, we can move forward. We're not treating it any differently than we've always treated it. It's going to be the same. This particular section here, the notice for the right of rescission, is ultimately where that notice is going to be delivered, if it is going to be delivered.
Okay, so we can put all our information in there to the attention of Jackie.
If I'm writing a contract for you know, for a seller, or I'm negotiating for a seller, I want the rescission notice to come to me. And it's my job to make sure that they're aware of it. They will know that if rescission comes, this is where it's going to go. And it's our job to make sure we keep our clients informed.
Okay.
I'm in.
Yes, good morning. I'm still confused about this acceptance date. I come from a background where the last person that accepted all the changes accepts that contract. So that could be a seller or a buyer. But apparently here it's always the seller. So here's a scenario. I'm at the listing side, I get an offer. My seller counters back. These guys come back tomorrow because they have enough time until, let's say, until Sunday. So my seller counters back today, the buyers come back tomorrow, initialing all the changes, saying, yes, we accept. Now, which day do I put in here as far as my seller is concerned?
So you nailed it right off the bat, Amin. The last person to put their initials or signatures on for final acceptance, whoever does that should be putting that date in item number 26. Ultimately, the challenge is we see realtors not operating that way, and it can cause problems. So the way you've done it, or the way you've experienced it, is the way it should be happening. Unfortunately, that's not always the way it happens.
Okay, I in my last listing, I honestly had trouble with this, understanding this, because the buyer agent almost trying to force me to go back and put a date in here, while I'm trying to argue that, you know what, when he countered back, that date does not necessarily mean that he accepted that offer.
That's correct. Yeah. A counter offer is not acceptance.
Okay, I think I'm clear now. Thank you.
Yeah. Ultimately, the date in 26 should be filled in on the date the final party accepts the terms and conditions, when you have full acceptance. And that really should be the same date that's going to go down here at the bottom as well.
Correct. So I don't really need to send that back to the seller. I can just plot those dates in myself, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And make sure they get copies of it. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bailey, you have a question?
Yeah, for the notice for buyer's rescission, right? My only question is, of course, fax is something that a lot of us don't use very often anymore. Can we just scratch that out so that they can't fax anything as a notice of rescission? Does it have to be filled in with a fax number?
Yes, it does.
Oh,
We should be putting a fax in there. So we should be completing this section with all of our information. So if we have templates, we can pre-populate all that information so that it will be put in there already. I'll go through our office templates and make sure that the office information is in there. But the act does allow for it to be sent by various forms. So we have to provide each form of notice to be delivered. It's ultimately going to be up to the buyer on how that's going to be delivered. But I would think, to be honest, with today's technology, we're going to be emailing, we're going to be scanning, we're going to be, we're going to still continue to communicate with cooperating realtors the same way we always have. If we do provide a notice, we're probably going to scan it and email it to them, and then we're going to follow up with a text to make sure that they've received it.
yeah, I think that that's most likely, but at the same time, like somebody faxes something on a Friday to the Ladysmith office, nobody is seeing that until Monday for the most part, right? But I guess if you feel that there could be a rescission to the contract, then you would just have to make sure that you're going to check that at that time, right?
Yeah.
Is it-
On day 3, if on day 3, we should be communicating with the buyer's agent. Will there be a rescission? Like what is the position of the buyer? What can we expect? Because if you're sending a rescission notice, please let me know so that I can deal with it appropriately.
Thank you.
Yep. Morning, Brad. You have a question? Oh, we can't hear you. No, can't hear you. Do you want to type it into the chat? Oh, there's a handful of chats here, sorry. That is correct, Janelle.
With the using the email for the rescission, not all of us have Outlook, so we can't do the read receipt. Is that going to be like something that's needed, or just follow email and then follow up is acceptable?
So there should be read receipt options in Gmail or most email accounts. Ultimately, you're going to have a record of it. It's the read receipt and the delivery notice that are key. The delivery notice tells you that it's been delivered to the recipient's email box, and the read receipt tells you that they've read it. The tricky thing with read receipts, though, is it's prompted. If I get a read receipt attached to an email that I collect, I have the option of sending a read receipt or not sending a read receipt. So it's a bit of a funny one. I think there's a little bit of gray area there, but we just want to make sure that we can track it. And if we send a notice, we'll have a copy of that, obviously, in our sent file, so we can save that email. But we're also going to follow up. To dear Mr. Selling Realtor, sorry if things aren't working out. Email the rescission has been emailed to you. Please confirm once it's received. Just a quick little text message.
Darren,
Yeah.
the other option would be to send out through follow up boss, and he actually tracks when it was opened, when it was clicked, and when it was opened. So that's another way of doing it.
Yeah. The key here really is making sure that we can verify it's been sent, and we can track it, and ultimately follow up. If you don't have a read receipt option, in your email, just said, please send a quick reply acknowledging receipt. And then, you can follow up with a text and that kind of stuff too. But ultimately, we just want to make sure that we get confirmation that it's been received to whoever it's been sent. Okay, any more questions where we are right now? Okay, the other form that came out was this one. So this is the form that BC FSA drafted, and this is the notice to the seller. It basically states that I'm canceling the contract and you're free to move on to somebody else. This really should be the only form used. So it is obviously in web forms. It's under the BC FSA folder. It's pretty straightforward. You know, it'll just be completed, signed, and sent off. This is this form also contemplates and acknowledges the release of the deposit to the appropriate parties depending on the deposit amount.
And Darren, just to clarify, this as well as the other disclosure form that we talked about previously are going to be added into our templates in web forms?
They are, yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Jack, you have a question?
Yeah, there has to be no explanation whatsoever for this. We sign it, we send it. There's no reasoning why. We're just doing it, correct?
The legislation says that if a buyer wants to, after making an offer or after having an offer accepted to purchase a property, the buyer has the sole right to walk away for a 0.25% penalty. And to be fair, like honestly, I really don't think we're going to see this a whole lot. You know, buyers are fairly well protected as it is right now, and obviously the market conditions have shifted dramatically. So you know, we're drafting contracts right now that protect our buyers. You know, we're not, you know, rolling the dice or you know, throwing a dart at a dartboard hoping to get something accepted. You know, we're writing, you know, valuable contracts, and we're making sure that buyers are protected. We're not in a situation, you know, where if a buyer is desperate to get a property, we just have to throw in a blank number and no conditions, and then hopefully, you know, we close. It's a very terrible market. It's an awful market to be participating in, and it's highly risky. You know, there are a number of unconditional contracts that were written over the last 2 years that probably should have had conditions in them. And you know, fortunately, not a ton has come through, but it's a very risky situation, especially when, you know, we have an unconditional offer, yet we're allowing for appraisers and people to come visit a property, you know, at their free will with notice kind of thing. That really indicates that they don't have financing secured. And if something like that goes sideways, ultimately we're going to be responsible. So. Any other thoughts, any comments? Is there anything I can help clarify?
I guess, Darren, I just wanted to say, so if you have a buyer that is very adamant, like, oh no, you know, I have cash, I don't want any conditions. Like for me personally, I feel like I'm going to say, well, let's add them in. So I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around each scenario.
Ultimately, yeah, it is tough. You know, you should, you know, generally we're going to know, you know, sort of our clients and understand sort of their capabilities, and some do have cash. You know, the protection method there that we have available to us, which allows us to keep the contracts clean, is our notice or recommended condition form. You know, it's an acknowledgement from the buyer that you guys have talked about financing conditions, you have talked about inspection conditions, you have talked about whatever conditions may need be, and the buyer has agreed that they do not need to be in the contract. And that helps keep the contract clean, which obviously makes it a little bit easier to present and much more manageable for a seller to work through.
So, but do you think a seller is going to look at an unconditional offer right now and be like, well, they'd almost rather have something that has only 3 days of conditions?
No, I mean, if I'm a seller and I get an unconditional offer, I'm thinking, hey, great. all we gotta do is make it past 3 business days and we're, you know, we're more or less sending it to the lawyers.
Okay.
And if not, there's money in the seller's pocket, is there not?
Yeah,
Mhm,
yeah.
yeah.
0.25% of the purchase price. Yeah.
Long as the deposit was paid.
Yes, and as we talked about a little bit earlier, I don't know if you were online earlier or not, Brad, but you know, from a listing agent perspective, you know, we're going to make sure that there is at least, you know, a deposit payable on acceptance or within 24 hours acceptance to cover that.
Is there going to be pushback? I guess there's going to be.
I don't think so. I would hope not. I think what's going to come from pushback is you know, a lack of understanding and a lack of clarity. You know, we see pushback with a DORT, for example, you know, and it really is, you know, how we utilize it, how we present it, and how we explain it. So, you know, the more we understand it, the simpler we keep it, the less pushback there's going to be. And, you know, like for a buyer to, you know, put up, you know, a couple $1,000 upfront on acceptance or within 24 hours of acceptance, if that's a problem for the buyer, we need to probably, you know, ask a couple of more questions on, so why is that a problem? And if you can't, you know, come up with a few $1,000 to cover this penalty, how are you going to cover a down payment or a deposit on the house? And that's all part of the, you know, your buyer intake. It's part of your qualification discussions, you know, that kind of thing.
Darren,
Yeah.
when you say we're going to enforce it or make it a policy to receive $5,000 if you're on the listing side, are you saying we're going to add this to the MLS listing info? So
No, it's not. You know, I don't think we're going to make it a policy. But I think you as realtors representing, you know, your sellers should be considering, you know, how these contracts are going to be written as far as collection. If a rescission notice is given and the deposit's not in trust, we're, you know, our seller is obviously going to want their penalty. Granted, the liability is on the buyer to pay the seller directly, but, you know, how are we protecting our seller if we haven't ensured that at least, you know, if it's $1 million, why didn't we ensure that $2,500 was paid up front? Our seller is going to want to, and that's exactly what our seller is going to ask us. Well, how come we didn't collect this up front then?
And
Why
so
do
that
I have to go through the process of collecting it?
So the language on that contract, the purchase and sale is going to say paid like within like immediate or within 8 hours or what?
Well, the language on the
Usually.
contract to purchase, the pre-populated language that's on the standard contract to purchase and sale right now for a deposit says it's paid within 24 hours of acceptance, unless otherwise specified. So what I see and what I anticipate seeing is we're going to see deposits payable up front, or we're going to see a tiered deposit. We're going to see, you know, $3,000 or $5,000 paid on acceptance or within 24 hours. And then the balance of that deposit, you know, whether it's $40,000 or $50,000 paid on subject removal.
Yeah.
So Darren, the way I usually do my deposits is I usually will say like 2 business days. Do you see any issue with that? Since the rescission period will now be in effect? Probably not, because that works off of business days as well, since Saturdays, Sundays, and statutory holidays aren't included. So
Yeah, there's some confusion around that, Ali. Hey, I mean, I heard that you're not supposed to use business days. We're supposed to use like the hours instead. But now we see the government with this program, the rescission notice, saying business days. So I guess that's okay.
So there's no confusion. It is business days. And it's 3 full business days. If you accept on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are your rescission period days. And if you accept on Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are your rescission period days. So yeah, and with respect to, you know, ultimately the terms of the deposit, you know, they always have been, and they always will be a negotiable item between the buyer and the seller. You know, there's probably going to be times where, you know, a buyer may need to pull money from an investment or cash a bond or whatever it may be, which might take a couple of days. that's the kind of thing from a buyer perspective, we can have a conversation with the seller agent about, and say, look, this is, you know, where the deposit is coming from. It's just going to take us a couple of days. Hope that's okay. And if it's not, we'll have to negotiate, you know, how that's going to go. No different than, you know, really what we already have been doing.
Great. And I might have missed something, Darren. Sorry. The acknowledgement, you were talking about an acknowledgement about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, and read receipts. What is that acknowledgement about? Sorry.
That's for this notice that you can see on screen. So when a buyer opts to cancel a contract based on the rescission period, you need to make sure that that notice is delivered to the seller or seller's agent, wherever the contract stipulates that notice gets delivered to. And we just follow up and confirm.
Okay.
It's the same thing
yeah.
as we do. You know, when we draft a contract of purchase and sale, you know, we'll scan it, we'll email it off to the realtor, and then we'll just send them a text saying, hey, I just emailed you a contract. Can you please confirm receipt?
Yep.
Same practice.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah.
The item 26 was my question regarding the upper portion of 26 and the lower portion of 26.
Yeah.
And that date that gets filled in. So the upper portion is immediate.
No.
And then the lower, or both portions are filled out at the same time when you have an accepted contract.
Both of these dates, the one here and the one here, should be the same.
Filled out and acknowledged at the same time.
Yeah, probably some of the confusion around this comes up because I brought it up. But when I'm reviewing contracts, like I've seen quite a few contracts where this date is filled in incorrectly. Like if a seller was drafting a counter offer, the listing realtor would fill this date in and send it off. And it should not have been. So, but ultimately, this date here and this date here should read exactly the same.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? It's 10 o'clock. We did manage to go through the forms. I just want to, like, I'm happy to stick around and chat some more if you want to talk about a couple of other things or answer some more questions. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
I just wanted to ask on the addendum 2 for the conditions, they don't have a time. And from what I was used to in Alberta, I'm quite sure there were times on there. So when sorry, that's my puppy. So when we have a date on there, you know, you're sitting there waiting until like 10, 11 at night for them to waive a condition. Is there a way we can just add our own time on there and have it initialed?
Not on the addendum. Well, on the addendum 2, yes, but I mean, you know, in our templates, we've essentially drafted those basic conditions into the CPS. So you can absolutely put 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever it is. The addendum 2, you know, that's a form that was created by the Victoria Real Estate Board. And I mean, all boards have created one of them. They're very basic, very generic. And I think that they're good if you're utilizing all those conditions. I'm I'm personally not convinced that the way it's utilized today is best practice.
Why is that?
Well, inserting conditions in a contract that aren't supposed to be in the contract. You know, when a condition is inserted into a contract, unless it's removed, regardless if it says waived where the date is supposed to be, it's still in the contract. It's messy. It's not as clear as it could be. If a contract is merely, you know, subject to financing, the only subject in that contract should be subject to financing. It's almost utilized, you know, as a cover your ass element for the realtor, and it really doesn't have a benefit to the client at all. It makes our life, you know, it makes some people's lives simpler, but ultimately, you know, we should know how to draft a contract and pull from our clause library. Those clauses don't mimic what our clause library and our standards of practice tell us what we should be using. Those are clauses that were drafted by the Victoria Real Estate Board, not the regulator and our licensing authority.
Would you prefer we just have a blank addendum and put in our conditions there and that's it?
Yeah, if you look at the Remax generation templates for purchase and sale, page 2 under terms and conditions on the CPS actually have the drafted clauses in place. And if you don't need them, you can just highlight them and delete them.
Okay.
And if you want to add a time to it, you just add, 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever you you and your buyer decide.
Sounds good. Thanks, Darren.
Yeah, you bet. Anybody else? Not all at once.
Nah. Okay. I was just going to touch on yesterday. I was at an appointment, so I missed out on kind of an overview of that, but only if we have time, and I don't want to take away from other things that are planned for the call.
Carry on, Brad.
Yeah, I just wanted to, about the disclosure of representation, there's a slight change to that. I haven't gone through it in detail, my bad, but
Honestly, it hasn't
touched on
changed.
that. Oh, it
It-
hasn't. Oh, okay.
What we did, so the disclosure, we talked about this a little bit earlier on, but this is that form that you have with your initial meeting.
Never seen it. Just kidding. Carry on.
And right here is really the first touch point. It's the first bit of written information that your client is going to receive about the notice of, or about the 3-day rescission period. My
Yes.
recommendation and suggestion was with your buyer package and even with your seller package, when you're going through this DORT and you're going through the privacy notice and the consent for collection and use of personal information, include the, where is it here? Disclosure. So this is all the information that will be contained in a contract that buyers and sellers are going to be dealing with. But if we include this in our initial prep package with lists or with sellers and with buyers, we're gonna go through all of this information. We're gonna talk about it so that when we come to the contract purchase and sale, it's gonna be clear, they're gonna understand it, and they're gonna be prepared for it. So I would be including this if I was meeting with a buyer for the first time, when we're talking about DORT and we're talking about the privacy notice, this form will be included right up front in that conversation. And even with sellers, when talking about listing properties, obviously our agency discussion is first, and this should be part of it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that it's part of our daily practice. Just one more element from the government for us to look after, and I can promise you it's a little bit new, obviously, but it will be very comfortable for us moving forward. We'll make sure it's very comfortable, and there'll be more. They'll always throw some stuff at us.
Yeah.
Anything else, anybody?
Preparing an offer. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is, it states at the top that this disclosure is made when you're preparing an offer to purchase and when you're reviewing an offer to purchase. And that obviously is contemplated given the fact that it's now embedded in the actual contract to purchase and sale.
Right. And when you hit the 3-day marker as a buyer's agent, are you doing anything, or just if they're not going to invoke the rescission, you just kind of just keep moving forward, I guess?
Yeah, you just keep moving forward. If I'm a buyer agent, I would expect confirmation or some sort of communication from the listing agent saying, hey, what's the plan? Or, I'm going to let the listing agent know that, buyer is not acting on their right of rescission. We're just going to move forward.
And that's a should, not a must?
Well, I would think it's a must.
I see.
I don't know if all realtors are. I hope we all will. I hope we all capitalize and we do our best to make sure that we're communicating with everybody that we're working with so that we're representing our clients properly. So I would say for us, it's a must. I don't know if all realtors will. Jack?
I just wanted to say thank you, Darren, for everything you've done. It's a huge advancement in my career. I really do appreciate these, and this is a major reason why I'm with the brokerage. So a shout out to you for doing your job the best you can. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Yeah. Thank you, Darren. This is fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Brown noser Jack.
I just speak from the heart, Anne.
Okay,
Did you
whatever.
find your little card that I left you on your desk yet?
I appreciate
You didn't
it.
leave me a card.
Okay, anybody else? Any comments, clarity, questions before we wrap it up for today?
I think we got it sorted out. I think I got it sorted out. If not, I guess I'll be going back to the.
You know what, feel free, call, text, email, you know, whatever you guys need, you know, just know that I'm here to help answer these questions and work through these changes with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. Appreciate
Okay.
it.
Thanks,
Thank
Darren.
you, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.
Good day, all.